Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen. Thank you for attending my presentation today. Even though I will be talking about bookstore course material adoption systems and various logistics involved with them, my presentation is really about textbook affordability. One of the aspects of that is that we really want students to know when they're registering for courses what it is likely to cost them in the way of course materials. And if faculty don't know how to use the systems or are reluctant to, especially when they're using zero cost learning materials for their course, that may be information that students do not have access to. And that's the exact kind of information that might help them make good choices if they're looking to save money on course materials. So I'll be getting into how that might work and why it's important for us to want to do that. You can feel free to get in touch with me after the session. At the very end, on one of my last slides, I'll have my contact information. And if there's a question that you don't get answered today, I'll be glad to hear from you and we can have a conversation. Now, my story starts with this presentation that I went to at a prior Affordable Learning Summit in the state of Pennsylvania. Our statewide group is called Affordable Learning PA, and we have a summit once a year. And I attended this session that I thought was really interesting because the gist of it was that at this institution, they have a Barnes and Noble bookstore, just like my own, and they were given access to the back end of the system, which is very unusual. Many of us may have good relationships with the bookstore. Some have adversarial relationships or no relationships at all. But even when you have a good relationship, it's highly unusual that the bookstore will let you get access to the administrative aspects of the system. But my big takeaway was that because they did have that access, they learned a lot about the inner workings of the course materials adoption system. With Barnes & Noble, that's called the AIP, the Adoption Insights Portal. And I'll typically refer to that as the AIP in this presentation. But I wanted to learn a lot about how that system works based on this presentation. I didn't feel like I needed to have an administrative account, but I thought if I know more about how this system works, I would have better insights myself into ways we might make better use of it to reflect the presence of zero cost materials being adopted by our faculty, because I knew that many faculty were not submitting those kinds of materials. And I need to understand more about why that was happening. Oh, here's my contact information if you do want to get in touch with me. Now, this is just a screenshot of some of the different kinds of dashboard information that you'll see in the AIP. And again, it doesn't really matter if you're Barnes & Noble or something else. You're likely that your bookstore has some kind of system of this nature, but it can provide you with a lot of detailed information about course materials adoption. You know, what are the trends in different schools, to what percentage of faculty are submitting adoptions, when are they submitting adoption, all kinds of useful information. But just knowing how the system works as a faculty member and what you need to know and do to get information into that system can be very helpful. And you generally don't see that when you're just looking at it from the public view. Here are some of the key takeaways I hope to communicate in the session today. It might seem, again, counterintuitive for a librarian to be talking about the bookstore's adoption system. Many times we're not paying attention to that. We're doing our own thing, you know, trying to encourage faculty to adopt OER, open education resources, or library ebooks, or again, other zero cost materials, or adopt open education practices. But I found there, again, was a reason why we would want to do this. I'll also talk a little bit about why faculty are somewhat reluctant to submit their information to the bookstore adoption system. I'll use a case study to illustrate how I learned about the bookstore adoption system and how that helped me. We did try to determine if our efforts to encourage more faculty to use the AIP actually had a difference on what we were seeing in terms of the level of adoption and when it was happening. And again, your campus may differ in that you have a different kind of system. You may be an independent bookstore, a Follett, but in most cases, there's going to be some kind of software system that faculty use to adopt their course materials. And that's what you really want to find out about. Now, we're not going to do a poll because this is a recorded session, but for now, you could use the chat to indicate what you know about your bookstore course materials adoption system. So you could put into the chat either A, B, C, or D, depending on what your particular response is. Or if you want to make a comment about this, please feel free to do that. You can use the chat throughout the session to add comments, questions, and so on. And we'll have time to get to some of those questions. So here was the gist of the problem. So this is our registration system, and a lot of us want to have course markings. And if you're not familiar with course markings, these are indicators you can put into the registration system that will show students what the cost of materials are for a particular course. And it might hopefully show 0 or some other range of cost. Now, we can't actually show the cost in our registration system, but we did have a column that said bookstore, but I think a lot of students didn't know what that means. So we did actually change that so it read course material costs. And with that $sign, that's where students would have a better opportunity to click. And what it would do is it would take them into the bookstore, what we call the course lookup, and it would show them for their particular course, like this one, Introduction to Health Services, what the cost of the materials will be. Now, the problem we found is that so many of our faculty were not using the adoption system that when students did go and check, they would see a statement like there's no material adopted for their course. In other words, we can't give you any information about the cost because we don't know what the faculty member is going to adopt. And in many cases, that's going to be challenging for the student if they really want to know what the cost materials are. So again, the goal was to try to increase the number of faculty who were using the AIP to adopt so that when students came here, they'd be able to see at the time they're registering what the cost of materials are, or hopefully that there are 0 costs for that course. So why don't faculty often submit these materials? And I think the number one reason I found talking to our faculty is that they just assume that students are not going to buy their materials from the bookstore. So it's like, why should I go to the trouble and take the time to submit to this software system that in many cases faculty find not user-friendly, difficult to navigate, and so on. And so that's a big reason why their course materials don't end up in the system so that students can look it up and find out what the price of the materials are, or that it's 0 cost. There are also maybe cases where faculty don't want to adopt something right away. They want to wait until later in the year. Maybe they're modifying the course and they're going to be finding new materials. And that's always a bit of a challenge. Like, how would we indicate that there's a range of what it might cost, but we don't know just yet? So that's another reason, but I think that's a smaller percentage. And then the other big problem is that there are a lot of faculty who are not using any textbook, or they're using OER or some other 0 type content. And they just assume when they get this email from the bookstore asking them to submit that, oh, well, I don't have to pay any attention to this because I'm not asking my students to buy a book. And why else would I send them to the bookstore? And that's really important because in the case of things like OER or other 0 cost materials, many of these systems do have a way to reflect what that is. And it can then show students that they're not going to be, the course is not going to be asking them to pay for the materials. It's going to be 0 cost to them. And then the other reason I found that faculty don't use the materials adoption system is that they assume, well, I'm just going to put the links to the resources in my Canvas course or other management system, and they're just going to point the students to another online source They'll just assume, again, students are going to go to Amazon or some other source, or they may be using library ebooks or free materials, and they again assume I'll just put the links in my Canvas system, and who cares whether it's in the bookstore system or not. And again, that can be problematic. This is just a screenshot of what students see when they go to the bookstore and they want to find their course materials. But the way the registration system looks, if you think back to that icon I showed you for course materials, the cost, it actually will take the student right to the course that they're interested in. They don't have to do the lookup. But the other interesting thing about this system is under that course materials menu, you can actually screen for OER. But there are some problems with that as well in this system, as I discovered. Like, for example, if a faculty member is adopting an OpenStax textbook, that will actually be in the system, but only because the bookstore can provide access to print versions. If someone's adopting an open textbook library book and there's no available print version of it, it's the bookstore can't obtain that. There's no way they can offer it, so it doesn't show up. That's a bit of a problem, but again, I think they're just students knowing that a course is using OER can be reflected, and they know it's not going to cost them anything. So what really helped me is that I found a good test case that helped me do a deep dive into the bookstore's AIP system. And it all started with a request to our lib answers in which this faculty member wanted to know about copyright regarding materials they wanted to use for their class. And that right away tells me there are some possibilities here that if there are copyright issues with materials, we might be able to find OER that would satisfy their needs, and there would be no copyright issues in that case. And so after having a conversation with the faculty member, I discovered that we actually had an ebook version of the book they wanted to use, and it was the same edition. Great. And there's unlimited access. So now how do we reflect in the AIP system that this faculty member is adopting this particular library ebook? Can it do something like that? And that's where I really started to do my investigation. And I found out that there's a lot that I didn't know that I needed to know, starting with the fact that there actually is a way, if a faculty member wants to adopt a library ebook, that they can add a note to the system that there is going to be a free digital version available through the library. They couldn't put the link in there. Well, maybe we could. We didn't try, but there is a limited amount of text you can put in that message box. But what really happens is that when the faculty member is adopting this, it will show the students what versions they can purchase, new print, used print, rentals, and so on. But they'll still see that there is a free version available through the library as an ebook. And this is actually what the student sees. First, you can see at the very top, there's a note that tells them, wait for class, which means you'll get more information from the instructor about acquiring the course materials. You can also see now in that green box, that note we added that lets the student know that they're going to be able to get a free digital version through the library. And when we put the word free in there, that hopefully catches the student's attention. But still, if a student did, for some reason, want to purchase one of these versions, they can do that as well. We can't eliminate that information from the system. That is a challenge. Now, one of the other things I discovered is that you can do two things in the system, but I did also find from faculty that this is a screen that's not easy to find. And that was part of our challenge. They can indicate that they're not using any materials, and that can be very explicitly shown to students, which is good. Then they can also click this button to yes to show that they're using open education resources. Now, again, we all know that faculty tend to conflate OER with other things, free things on the web, things that are copyrighted but might have a free version. But this is a start. And while they can't actually indicate the title or the link here in the system, there might be other ways to get around that, or they just put it on the syllabus and the student will find the information that way. But again, if this information is there when the student goes to register for the course, great, they're seeing that they're not going to have to pay for any course materials. That's what we really want them to know. So again, here's that same OpenStax sociology book, and we can actually add a note to, again, draw the student's attention to the fact in that green box that there is a free ebook version. And I was able to just put in the general OpenStax URL to get the student over there. Not an active link, but it might be helpful to students. And again, the reason we're seeing costs for print and rental is that the bookstore does provide access to those options if a student should want it. And it would be great at some point further on down the road to actually hopefully find out how many times are students requesting those types of print or rentals versus going and using the free version. The system doesn't give you that kind of information, so we had to figure out other ways to obtain it. Now, here's an example of the case of the faculty member who just clicks no course materials required. Very obvious to the student that they're not going to have to purchase anything for this course. So that's great. So now we have some very useful information that we're finding out how to add into this AIP system that previously many faculty did not know they could do. They did not know that they could enter that they're using OER. They did not know that they could enter that there's no course materials required, or that if they're using a library ebook, they can add notes into this system. So we really want to make sure that faculty are aware of this so that they just don't blow off that message that they get telling them that it's time to adopt their materials in the system. And I do know of some institutions that make this more mandatory, and that you can't teach your course if you haven't done that by a certain date. But we haven't done anything like that at our institution. I'm sure many others haven't either. So the first thing that we wanted to do to get the message out was get an article into our Faculty Herald, which is our primary newsletter for our faculty. And again, no guarantees that all faculty members read this publication, but it's a great place to publicize this information. And in fact, that's exactly what we did. This is an article that I published with, actually co-wrote with our bookstore's textbook manager, because they were able to make sure I had all the accurate information. We had screenshots showing faculty how to do all the things that I just showed you previously about how they could add their more unusual course materials, their zero cost materials. And we took them through that step by step, pointed them to instructional videos and so on. And if you're interested in this article, you can do an internet search, obviously, on the title and the names and so on, but feel free to get in touch with me and I'll send you the direct link to it if you want to replicate something like this for your faculty. The other thing we thought was really important is, okay, so what are we currently telling faculty when it's time to adopt course materials? There's a deadline, and there is something called the Higher Education Opportunity Act, which actually requires that we comply with a regulation to tell our students what the cost of the materials are on the at the time of registration. And we knew that a lot of faculty were not doing this, and we were not in compliance. But if we looked at this letter, and there's some language in here that is either incorrect, it's off-putting, or it's certainly not written in a way that's going to motivate faculty to do this. Like when you tell faculty it's imperative that you comply with this, yeah, I can see faculty right off the bat saying, the heck with this, I'm not going to bother. So what we did is we totally rewrote this letter from a different angle, and we turned it into more of an FAQ. And you'll notice that what we tried to do was appeal to faculty's interest in helping their students with the expected cost of the course materials, as an advantage or benefit to the student, rather than something we were forcing them to comply with. And we put right up in front, okay, so what if I'm using OER or other zero cost materials like library ebooks? So we're making it very clear right at the top that, yes, this system can let you incorporate that information as a course adoption. And then we had other useful questions that we knew faculty often ask about the system. And we also are linking them to instructional videos, how they can get more help, all those kinds of things. So this was really important. It's like, how are you communicating to faculty that this is important and that it can do more than they think it can do? We also included lots of screenshots of where to find in the system to indicate that you're not using course materials or that you're using OER. We heard from faculty on our textbook task force. That's our cross-institutional committee that actually made this one of its initiatives to try to encourage more faculty to adopt. So our faculty on our group were saying, hey, what I'm hearing is that faculty don't know this. They don't know where it is in the system. So we wanted to make sure we had more instructional information so it would work better. And then, of course, we wanted to see if it actually made a difference, all this effort, changing the letter, publicizing this, getting the word out to faculty. And so I did also discover that the bookstore has a lot of data about course material adoptions that we could use. Just to give you a simple example, if you look at that column over on the right about percent of OER adoption, compared to fall of 22, we probably had about 1% of all adoptions were OER, or at least they clicked the button, I'm adopting OER. Again, we know faculty may conflate OER with other kinds of materials that are not OER, but we actually got that up to nearly 5%. So instead of having just a few courses indicating that we're using OER, we had close to 300 courses indicating that they were using OER. Didn't see as much for library ebooks though, so that's something we have to continue to work on. We can also see by the different colleges what their adoption rates are. What I learned is that overall by the end of, let's say, or rather when we get to the fall semester, we've got about 75% of faculty have used the AIP to adopt materials. So that's, what about that other 25%? We need to get them using that system as well. So there's more work to be done here. But one of the things we did see as a result of our revised letter is that faculty were adopting more quickly, closer to the deadline for adopting. We saw more faculty, using the OER or the no materials. And we saw some schools that previously had very low adoption rates did see a bump up in their adoption rate. So overall, I would say this was a success, although we clearly have more work to do. But this was just the first time we really tried this initiative. We're just about to start for the spring of 2024, and I'm hoping we'll do even better in that semester. The other good outcome is that I was able to get from the bookstore a spreadsheet of all the courses and faculty who did click that OER button. So now we had like 200, 300 identified faculty who said they were using OER. That's one of the biggest challenges we sometimes have on our campuses, finding out who actually is using OER. So again, there's a huge benefit here. If we can get more faculty indicating through the AIP that they're using OER, we can actually find out who they are and what they're actually using and whether or not it actually is OER. And it might be an opportunity to, again, educate, create awareness, all very useful things that might be outcomes of this effort. So again, we're not taking the actual poll in real time, but again, you can indicate in the chat, how are you feeling now? Did this presentation expose you to some new ideas? Do you think it would make a difference for you at your institution? Or maybe at this point, you don't know enough about what you don't know to know if it would make a difference. So you could indicate, we could just put in red, orange if we're not feeling so great about that, or green if we are feeling like, yeah, I feel more confident now. I think this could have some really good outcomes at my institution if we gave this a try. So just some next steps for you. Obviously, the big one is if you don't already have that relationship with your bookstore, kind of get in touch with them and let them know you're interested in learning more about the adoption system and how that can be used, and be transparent about why you're interested in doing that. It's great for the students. They will love having more faculty using it to adopt. That's And so they might really want to partner with you. So if you haven't had a good relationship with your bookstore, this might be the perfect opportunity, because what you want to do is also in their best interest. And you especially want to find out, how does it handle OER or library ebooks? How would that be reflected? And it's also important for us institutionally for faculty to comply with that federal regulation to submit these course material adoptions by a certain point, so that when students are registering, they have access to that information. Again, now that you've seen some of what can be done, you can compare your bookstore to what I've shown, and maybe it's better, maybe it's worse, maybe it needs to or can get better. And again, it really helps if you have a campus coalition like our textbook task force that had representatives from across campus, including the bookstore, to work with you on creating awareness, especially your faculty affairs office that can help you connect with faculty on this. So thanks for attending this presentation. I hope you found it useful. And if you want to get in touch with me, please do. I'll be glad to have a further conversation. But I think now we will have time for questions and answers, and I'm going to stop the recording now.